Alright, so we're back and we're going to see if we can wrap this up. Okay, so we've gone over a lot of things. Portal lights, aerial lights, shadows, sky shaders, this, and volume lights, that, and all kinds of stuff. And we've even gone over the photographic exposure and tone mapping. Now it's time to wrap this up and do the final part of this, which is to introduce some indirect illumination. Because right now we don't have any type of indirect illumination. All of our lighting is based off of basically one massive direct lighting rig made up of all these different portal lights, spotlights, all over the place. So what we're going to do is simply introduce indirect illumination by way of final gathering. So to turn on final gathering, we'll go over here to the render options. We'll go to renderer options. And let me pin this down. Okay, and over here you see a tab called final gathering. By default, it's turned off. So let's go ahead and check on the enable option there. And now we can see all these options pop up for us to use final gathering. Okay, so we have lots and lots of options. I'm not going to go over every single one of these options one by one, because this is not a beginner's tutorial. I actually covered all of that in our introduction to mental ray training product. So I won't be going over that right here. What I will be going over is going over the settings to get this to render out real good. So I'm in automatic mode, which is what I want right now. A new mode in XSI is in XSI 7 is called exact mode. Because it's a new mode, I will go over it. So exact mode works a little bit different than the other modes. All of these other modes, multi-frame, automatic, expert, even legacy mode, they all work by taking the final gather points and just mushing them up together. It's actually known as interpolation. Basically what happens is things are averaged out, so to speak. So things are not exact. Well, exact mode does the exact opposite. Instead of interpolating points, you basically use an exact number of rays. That's it. There's no other parameter to change. If you come over here to say automatic mode, you can change different parameters, like let's say the number of points that are interpolated. You can also change the view dependency. You can also put on you can also switch to the minimum maximum radius, and you can also switch to come back here to exact mode, and you only have the number of rays to change. Okay, now in order to make exact mode look higher quality, the only parameter you have to change is the number of rays, which right now I have set to 32. So what are the benefits and the drawbacks to using exact mode? Well, the benefits are you get a more precise and more accurate final gather solution as opposed to using one of the other modes, which interpolates the final gathering points or the rays. In this case, you get just a number of rays that is more physically accurate and looks more realistic. It makes your results look more realistic and higher quality. But there's a drawback to it, and that's rendering time. The expense of the higher quality and the more accuracy in this final gather mode means that you're going to be rendering a lot longer. Renders are going to be a lot slower, and they're not going to be optimized at all because you can't set any optimization parameters. The only parameter is the number of rays. So in order to get a render to look good, you would have to come in here and put a large number of rays. A very large number of rays. For our particular scene, I wouldn't be surprised if we'd have to use something like 2,000 rays or something like that. So it's it's a give or take. If you want higher quality, you're going to have to take a hit in render speed. So just keep that in mind. And we can actually test it out here just to show you how it works. So let me go to maybe this viewpoint right here, and let's do a render preview. Alright, so this is what we end up with. And it's a pretty bright scene, and that's of course because of the final gathering, but there's also another reason why it's so bright. And that's because right now my diffuse bounces here is set to 2. The default should be 0. I have mine set to 2. So I could knock this down to 0, which means there's going to be 1 diffuse bounce. If I put 1, there's going to be an extra diffuse bounce, which basically means that there's going to be 2. If I put a number 2, there's actually going to be 3 diffuse bounces, so it gets pretty bright. Right now with only 1 diffuse bounce, which is a setting of 0, I know it's kind of weird, but that's just the way it works. A setting of diffuse setting of 0 actually means that there's 1 final gather bounce in the scene. And you can see that even with just 1 bounce, it's actually rendering out pretty bright. And you also notice that by reducing the number of diffuse bounces, the render time for final gathering actually sped up. So you render out faster when you do less final gather diffuse bounces. So there we go. So our scene is pretty bright. Let's render it out from another angle. So let's turn our camera around here and let's render out from something like maybe back here. See what we get. Okay, so this is what we got. It doesn't look too bad. I'm going to go back here to the final gather options, and exact mode at 32 rays doesn't look too bad, but again, this is a pretty rough, small quality render. So let me close that. I'm going to switch from exact mode to automatic mode so we have some point interpolation. And now let's do another render preview. Alright, so this is basically what we end up with here. So let me close the PPG there for mental ray, and let me also close this render preview window there. And let me go ahead and go to some of these lights and see if there's any settings that I want to change. So let's start off with this light right here, which appears to be pretty bright. We'll come in here and see about making this light a little bit darker, because right now it seems to be pretty bright. Let me render from behind these bars. This will be a pretty cool view to render from. Okay, so this is what we have. A very, very interesting angle here. It looks very cool. But the light back there that's coming in from the ceiling, at least in my opinion, looks a little bit too bright, and it's killing the mood in the scene. So what I'm going to do is that with the ceiling light selected, I'm going to take its multiplier and reduce it by quite a bit. So it's 1,000 right now. Let's see if we can knock it down. Let's try knocking it down by about, maybe not half. Let's try 600 and see what that gives us. Okay, so that's a little bit better. It still looks a little bit bright. Let me close that for the moment, and swing out back here. Let's just come around here and see if we can render from a different angle here. Let's try rendering from maybe this angle right here. Might not look too bad. Let me try this. Okay, so that's what we have. Now our image is a little bit overly bright. I mean, it's not too bright, but I don't like the way how we're losing some of those nice shadows. I like the contrast and stuff that we had before. You also notice that our colors are a little bit washed out. That's because of the photographic exposure shader, and also we have lost shadows on this back wall here, and this light is not very bright, light that's coming into the window. So I'm going to make a few changes. First thing I'm going to do to fix that shadow problem from this light here is I'm going to reduce the size of the light. If I come over here to the scale, I should hold down shift and right click on X, Y, and Z. I can type in 0.5 to make the light smaller. That automatically is going to give us our shadows back in that area. Just to show you, I'll go back here to render options. I'm going to turn final gathering off for the moment because it's really slowing me down. And if I come in here and do a test render, you can already start to see that our shadows from the iron bars are now being projected on this back wall the way that they're supposed to, which is obviously good. But I don't like the way that this light is on the back wall. It's just doesn't seem intense enough. Appears to be an artificial light as opposed to a sort of sunlight effect. So I'm going to do a couple of things. I'm going to go ahead and close this. Then I'm going to go over here to Scene in my MCP. And I'm going to find the arc window volume light, which is this one. I'm going to open up its PPG. And I'm going to increase its intensity. I'm going to double it. I'm also going to go ahead and switch from RGB to, well, this thing's already saturated pretty good. Okay, I'm not going to worry about this. I'm going to fix the saturation of my colors by way of the photographic exposure shader. So let me close this. Let's do another preview render. Okay, that's a little bit better. But you also notice that my door here looks a bit washed out wherever the light hits it. So to fix that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Render, go to Pass Options. Down here I'm going to go to, in the Patch Shaders tab, I'll go down to the MIA Photographic Exposure Shader, double click on it to open up its PPG, and I'm going to make some changes. I'm going to take the gamma curve and I'm going to knock it down to about 1.8 because it's a little bit too strong now. And I'm going to increase the saturation to 1.25 to bring back some of the colors in this image. And I'll render again to see what I get. Okay, so you can automatically start to see that my darks and lights are working a lot better. There's more contrast there, and my colors have come back. I now have a more colorful image, which is what I was going for. Remember that this isn't we're not exactly going for photorealism here. We're going for a kind of stylized, moody lighting effect here. So this looks pretty good. Now that light coming in from the sun really does feel warmer, and it feels more like a nice bright sunlight coming in through the window there, which of course is good. It's the effect that we were going for. So let me close that. Let me actually close the exposure shader as well. I'm going to go ahead and middle mouse button click on the second memory slot there for my camera, just so I can remember this spot, because it's actually a pretty good spot. I like it. I'm also going to do a preview render back from this original spot just to see how the brightness is looking here. I may have to make some changes to the ceiling light that's over here. The ceiling light doesn't look too bright, but it could use a little bit more darkening up just to give this thing a little bit more mood. So what I'm going to do is go back and explore my scene here, and I need to get my ceiling light, open up its PPG there, and right here I'm going to go ahead and tone down the multiplier to 500, which is half of what we had it originally, which was 1000. The other thing that you also notice is that the sunlight that's coming into that window looks a little bit dull and doesn't look very bright. So I think I'm going to go ahead and brighten it up. And actually, it already looks brighter just by knocking down the intensity of the portal light that's above the ceiling there. But I still want to fix that. So I'll go and explore my scene here, and I'm going to go find that the ceiling volume light is under the spot root over here. Here it is, ceiling volume light. I'll open up its PPG, and its intensity is set to 3000. And I'm going to go ahead and take that intensity and I'm going to probably increase it. Let's try 4000. So it's not much of an increase, but it's a pretty good increase. We should see a pretty decent difference here between the before and the after. Okay, that looks pretty good. It's a little bit brighter now. Looks pretty nice. I like that. I'm going to go ahead and say that I'm happy with that at the moment. And close that. Close that. I'm also going to go over here to this hall because I've been ignoring it for a good amount of time. And I'm going to go back here and do a preview render from back here. See what I get. Okay, so I can already start to see what's coming out from this render. And I mean, it's looking pretty good, but for some reason I'm finding it to be a little bit too bright. I mean, the light intensity looks pretty good, don't get me wrong. But in terms of the mood and the atmosphere that I'm trying to go for artistically, I want these lights to be probably a little bit darker. So what I'm going to do is come over here to my scene to explore it. I'm going to select both the hallway light 1 and 2 and hit enter to open up their shared PPG. This way when I change the a value of one light, they both are changed at the same time. Let me go ahead and take the multiplier of this and knock it down to about, let's try 350, see what that gives us. That worked to darken it up just a little bit, but honestly the difference is it's very difficult to see. So I'm going to knock this down to 200, see what that gives us. Okay, so that looks much darker, much nicer. I'm liking the effect of this light a lot better now by reducing its intensity. So let me close that. Let me close that as well. Let me get in here a little bit closer, something like this right here, and I'm going to save this camera viewpoint right there. I'm also going to come over here to these iron bars over here, and I'm probably going to save a viewpoint from here as well. I want to see how this looks from this angle. So maybe I'll just zoom out a little bit there, and I'm going to save that viewpoint there. So let's go back to this viewpoint, which is the third one right here. And now let's turn on final gathering and see what we get. I'm going to switch my map file settings from overwrite existing file to append new final gather points to file, just so we get rendering faster the more final gather renders we make, the faster it's going to start to accumulate. So let's go ahead and do a test render and see what we get. Okay, so it's finishing up the render here, and this looks simply fantastic. It's staggering to say the least. This is just an awesome way of lighting scenes with Mentoray and Exercise 7 using the new Mentoray 3.6 and some of the new features. You can see clearly here the light intensities are just beautiful. The way the light's interacting here with our scene. The shadows being cast by those bars are simply fantastic, adds a lot of mood to the scene. And those portal lights, they're just simply amazing. Look at the way that they just bring in the colors and the intensities, and also the fact that they help out Final Gather and they can concentrate Final Gather into our scene better and more efficiently is a huge plus in terms of render quality and speed. This rendered out relatively quick, even though I did pause the video, but it did render out pretty quick. It took about less than a minute to render this out, and the quality actually looks very, very good. You can see the indirect illumination from the Final Gathering lighting up this back wall that's right there, where the portal lights can't actually hit that wall because they're facing toward us. But thanks to Final Gathering, it creates a nice indirect illumination effect which lights up those walls the way that they would be lit in real life had this been a real scene. So I'm really liking the mood of this. Looks simply fantastic. Let's try rendering from different angles here and see how cool this looks. So let's render out from this angle over here behind the bars. Okay, so it's finishing up here. This looks very cool. Even though we have Final Gathering turned on, you can see that this area behind the bars where the camera's at, or where our person is, whoever's looking into this prison, is pretty much pitch black, which actually looks really cool. That's actually what I want, to have some mood. So I have the Final Gathering, but the Final Gathering is not blowing out my scene and making it too bright to the point where I lose this kind of this moody atmospheric feel from my dark and bright lighting. And you can see that the background there, the back wall looks like it's lit pretty awesome there. It really is convincing of a sun either going through a sunset or a sunrise. You can see back right here, and that nice misty effect that the volume light brings in simply just looks awesome. Now, I'm not too happy with the volume light that's coming from the ceiling, but I don't exactly want to get rid of it. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go back to this viewpoint here, and I'm going to go ahead and search for that ceiling volume light, which I believe is right here. Here it is. Let's open up its PPG. The intensity is pretty good. What I'm probably going to do is, with that light selected, go here to selection in the MCP and open up its volumic light property here. And I'm going to take the reflectance of the volume effect and knock it down by about half. So I'll put it down to about 25 because it looked like it was just too bright, too strong, and it was really taken away from the main volumic effect of the light coming in through the main window. So let's render this out and see what we end up with. And working with rendering in any 3D package, including XSI, means that you're going to be doing a lot of preview renders if you want things to look good. And you can see that using the append to final gather points option is really paying off. You saw how quickly it got sort of a speed burst there and rendered out really fast the final gathering. That's because we have that append to final gather points option turned on in our final gathering options. And you can see this looks pretty good. I really like the way that this is looking. Still looks dark, but it's lit up enough where we can see what's going on. Okay, looks pretty cool. And the water well here is getting some nice light bouncing off of the floor and hitting it right there, which looks fantastic. Yet our final gather effect isn't so strong that it's killing our shadows. Our shadows are looking pretty good, nice and dark. As you can see up here, especially around the ceiling, top roof area. And that's kind of the moody feel that I was really going for. Okay, and you can see our volume effect here coming from the ceiling isn't overly bright, looks pretty good. I'm going to say that I'm pretty happy with that, so I'm going to go ahead and leave that alone. And maybe I'll do a render from this side over here, or actually one render that we should do is probably from this side right here, because this is pretty much the main shot of the scene here. So let's render out from this angle, see what we get. Alright, so this is wrapping up and it's looking really, really good. I love the volume effect coming into the main window. I also like the fact that the Final Gathering, like I mentioned before a few times, isn't killing the mood of our scene. It's adding that nice subtle touch of indirect illumination, but it's adding it more at an artistic level as opposed to a physically accurate level, which is what I was going for. I was going more for an artistic custom look to this as opposed to going with complete photorealism. And that allows us to get these nice colors. As you can see, here's this nice cool color bouncing off of that ceiling light. Then we have this nice warm color filling up our room. Then we have this sort of really dark area back there and back there. And past the bars, if you keep looking out in the distance, there's that hallway with some of that light coming in, that ambient light coming in from the outside. Which, if we had a prisoner in here, he'd probably feel like if he could just get through those bars, he can just go around that hallway and get out of this prison. Unfortunately for him, if he did do that, he'd be sad to find that there's even more prison bars and two little tiny windows at the end of that hallway, which really stinks for him, but oh well. Okay, so this is looking pretty good. If you want to, we could sit here all day and try out different render settings to make this look different. If you want to, feel free to go ahead and take the lights and tweak them and change them however you want. Turn off the lights in the hallway if you want that hallway to be completely dark. Change the color of the lights in the ceiling and in this main window where it's coming in. Change the intensity of the volume effect and increase and decrease the settings as you see fit. If you come over here to the renderer options, you can set up your minimum level. I would set it to about 1 and the max level to about 3. I would also set the sampling contrast to 0.05. Will look really good. And I would also come to Final Gathering. I would add more Final Gather rays. For this particular scene, you don't have to have, say, 500 Final Gather rays or 1,000 or anything like that. Honestly, that's overkill. You can honestly get away with using as little as 256, maybe even 128. And I invite you to try that out. Try to render this out with a number of rays set to only 128 and leave these settings, the rest of these settings, how they are. And you'll be pleasantly surprised at the fact that you can get a very high quality render, at least a rendered still, with such a low number of rays. So you get a lot of speed in your Final Gathering render, but you also get a really good amount of quality. And also, the next thing you'd probably want to do is come to your pass options, go to the output tab here, and change the resolution of your render. So make yourself a nice big render, say 2,000 pixels, or not 200, 2,000. I was never good at math, by the way. So you might want to do a really big render like this. And if you were to go ahead and render this out at this size, it's going to take a really good while, as you can probably imagine. So I'm not going to go ahead and make you watch something render like this, but I invite you to go ahead and hit the render button. Just check out this version of the scene, the version that's finished, and then hit the render button and go take a coffee break or something and come back and see what you've got. And again, it's a lot of fun to come in here and customize the light rig to your liking. So change the colors, change the intensities. Maybe you don't like the position of a certain light, so you might want to take the light and delete it, and do different things like that. So it's really up to you. So have fun and enjoy playing around with this scene and the lighting setup in this scene. And I will see you in the next video where we'll continue to hammer away at Mental Ray and keep working here with exercise 7 and Mental Ray 3.6.